Michelle Obama took the spotlight at the Democratic National Convention, delivering what the media eagerly called a powerful speech. But Megyn Kelly noticed something they didn't, something unexpected, something that wasn't meant to stand out. Was Michelle Obama's speech really a heartfelt push for unity, or was it a well-orchestrated distraction from the Democratic Party's struggles? And why did her words feel less like a rallying cry for Biden and more like an unspoken admission that his presidency had flopped? Let's dig in. Chicago, August 2024. The Democratic National Convention was buzzing with energy, but something felt off. The tension was thick, the pressure was sky high, and beneath the polished speeches and perfectly curated optics, one thing was obvious. The Democratic Party was in full-blown crisis mode. Then, Michelle Obama walked onto the stage. But was this the big game-changing moment the Democrats so desperately needed? Or was it just another well-rehearsed political show? And more importantly, was Michelle Obama there to spark hope? Or was she subtly admitting the party was in trouble? Megyn Kelly's reaction to this speech hinted at something the mainstream media had conveniently chosen to ignore. This DNC was always going to be a historic moment for the party. Joe Biden had stepped down, not finished his term, not gracefully retired, stepped down. After months of abysmal polling numbers and public struggles on the campaign trail, the sitting president was gone. But of course, they weren't about to call it a failure. Instead, the official story spun it as a selfless decision made for the good of the country. But let's be real. Everyone knew what had actually happened. Party leaders pushed Biden out because they knew he was a lost cause, and that left a massive problem. With Biden out, Kamala Harris automatically became the nominee. But there was one big issue. No one was particularly excited about her. She had spent 4 years as Biden's VP, and in that time, her approval ratings had barely moved above rock bottom. Even among Democrats, support for her was lukewarm at best. So the party needed a star. Someone who could shift the conversation, bring energy back to the base, and patch up the cracks threatening to split the party apart. And that's where the Obamas came in. Because let's be honest, Barack and Michelle Obama are still the biggest power players in the Democratic Party. Their influence hasn't faded. Their network is still as strong as ever. And when the party is in deep trouble, they are the ones called in to fix things. Barack Obama's presence was all over the DNC, even though he wasn't the one delivering the headline speech. His endorsement carries more weight than any other Democrat alive today. His circle of donors, media allies, and political insiders keeps the party in line with his vision. And behind closed doors, reports suggest he played a key role in nudging Biden toward the exit. But it was Michelle Obama who took center stage. She was introduced as a voice of hope, a unifying force in a turbulent time. And the speech? Classic Michelle. Polished, emotional, crafted to connect with everyday Americans. She spoke about tough times, the feeling of hopelessness across the country, and the urgent need for leadership that could bring people together. The crowd loved it. The media couldn't get enough. Social media exploded with praise. But something about the whole thing just didn't sit right. If America was really in such a rough spot, like Michelle Obama said, then who exactly was to blame for that? For the past 4 years, the Democrats have held the White House. They controlled Congress for the first half of Biden's presidency. They've been in charge of many of the biggest cities and most powerful institutions in the country. So if things are as bad as Michelle claimed, if people are struggling, if the country feels broken, if leadership is failing, then how does the very party responsible for those problems now get to present itself as the solution? Once you realize this, Michelle Obama's speech suddenly sounds very different. Megyn Kelly didn't hold back. Her response to Michelle Obama's speech at the DNC was sharp, direct, and cut through the media's glowing coverage. While reporters and commentators were busy fawning over Michelle's words, Kelly pointed out something no one else seemed willing to touch: the glaring contradiction sitting right in the middle of it all. Michelle Obama took the stage, locked eyes with the nation, and delivered a striking declaration. Hope is making a comeback. It was a powerful statement, the kind designed to stir emotions and inspire faith in the future. But hope from what exactly? And more importantly, hope from whom? She described an America in distress, divided, struggling, and uncertain about what comes next. But here's the part no one seemed to question. The Democratic Party has been in charge for the past 4 years. This wasn't an attack on Trump. It wasn't a dire warning about what might happen if he returned to power. No, this was a direct, if unspoken, indictment of America under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And yet, despite the weight of her words, none of the major news networks bothered to ask the obvious question. If things are truly this bleak, doesn't that mean the Biden-Harris administration has failed? Shouldn't voters be demanding answers rather than another term of the same leadership that brought them here? Megyn Kelly, however, wasn't about to let that contradiction slide. She called it out for what it was, a glaring admission, intentional or not, that the current administration had left the country in worse shape than they wanted to admit. Because you can't stand before millions of people, tell them their country is in turmoil, and then turn around and ask them to re-elect the very people responsible for that mess. That would be like trying to sell someone a used car by opening with, "Now, let me tell you about all the ways this thing could leave you stranded on the highway." And here's the kicker. This wasn't just an accidental misstep in her messaging. It was a colossal strategic blunder that exposed a much deeper truth about the state of the Democratic Party. For years, the Democratic leadership has insisted that things are improving. Joe Biden's steady leadership was exactly what America needed after Trump. That their policies were repairing the damage, rebuilding the economy, and moving the country forward. But now, at the most crucial political event of the election season, Michelle Obama stood in front of the world and admitted that things were still a mess, that Americans were still struggling. That unity, the very thing Democrats had promised to restore, was nowhere to be found. So why would she say that? Why would the Democratic Party allow one of its most high-profile figures to push a message that so clearly contradicts their own record? This is where things get really interesting. Because Michelle Obama's speech wasn't just directed at voters, it was also aimed at the Democratic establishment. And if you read between the lines, it strongly suggests that behind the scenes there is far more frustration and division than they want the public to see. For months, whispers have circulated that Barack Obama was quietly involved in convincing Biden to step aside. That some of the most influential Democratic donors were growing uneasy about the administration's ability to win in November. Those power brokers behind the scenes were already working on a post-Biden plan. Now, with Michelle Obama delivering a speech that sounded less like a ringing endorsement and more like a carefully crafted distancing act, it's not just speculation anymore, it's evidence. Her speech didn't carry the energy of someone who fully supports the Biden-Harris administration. It didn't feel like a rallying cry for their leadership or a passionate defense of their accomplishments. Instead, it felt like a warning, a subtle but deliberate move to position herself apart from the current White House, to create space between her legacy and theirs. And the timing of it all? That's the most telling part. Because if the Democratic Party truly believed in Joe Biden, Michelle Obama's speech would have sounded completely different. She would have stood on that stage and talked about how much progress had been made. She would have listed the ways Biden had strengthened the country, how his leadership had ushered in a new era of prosperity, and how Kamala Harris was the natural and obvious choice to continue his work. But that's not what happened. Instead, Michelle Obama painted a picture of a country still in crisis. And whether she meant to or not, she made one thing painfully clear. Even the most influential voices in the Democratic Party know the Biden era hasn't been the success they claimed it to be. And if that's the case, then the bigger question isn't just about Kamala Harris. It's about whether the Democrats are already preparing for a future without her too. Instead, she spoke about everything that had gone wrong, about lost hope, about America being at a crossroads. These aren't the words of someone defending an administration. They're the words of someone carefully stepping away from it. And that's exactly what Megyn Kelly picked up on. She pointed out what no major news network dared to touch. Michelle Obama was, in her own way, admitting that Biden's presidency had been a failure. And if that's the case, then why should anyone believe Kamala Harris, his vice president, his right-hand woman, the person who has been a part of every major decision, would be any different? That's what made Michelle Obama's speech even more revealing. Because if she had full confidence in Kamala Harris, she would have made that crystal clear. She would have delivered a passionate endorsement, listing all the reasons why Harris was the leader the country needed. She would have made a compelling case for why Harris was different, why she was the right person to bring back this so-called lost hope. But she didn't do that. For all the polished delivery, the emotional moments, and the carefully chosen words, something was missing. There was no strong, enthusiastic backing of Kamala Harris, no real argument for why she was the right choice, no heartfelt defense of her leadership. And the reason is obvious. The Democratic Party knows Harris is deeply unpopular. They know her poll numbers are even worse than Biden's. They know that even among Democrats, there's a lack of enthusiasm. So rather than make a direct case for Harris, Michelle Obama played it safe. She stuck to broad, feel-good themes: hope, unity, change, powerful words, sure, but vague enough that they don't actually commit to anything. And that's why Megyn Kelly's reaction stood out. While the mainstream media showered Michelle Obama with endless praise, Kelly focused on what wasn't being said. She pointed out the glaring contradiction. Michelle Obama spoke about the need for a fresh start, while at the same time backing the very people who had been running the show. These aren't just comfortable houses. These are massive, high-end estates with private beaches, guest houses, and sprawling grounds, way beyond what anyone could call a necessity. So here's the obvious question. Does Michelle Obama actually believe in what she's preaching, or is this just another well-rehearsed political act? And if she does believe in it, why haven't she and Barack set the example themselves? It's impossible to ignore the hypocrisy. Democrats constantly push for wealth redistribution, yet when it comes to their own bank accounts, the rules seem to mysteriously shift. The Obamas talk about income inequality, but their personal wealth has skyrocketed. They insist the rich should pay more, yet they've structured their finances in a way that conveniently minimizes their own tax burden. And let's take this a step further. Michelle Obama has openly supported open borders and policies that allow more illegal immigrants into the U.S. She's criticized conservatives for opposing mass migration, labeling them as lacking compassion. But here's something worth considering. If she truly believes in helping struggling migrants, why hasn't she opened even one of her 4 luxury homes to them? Let that sink in. The Obamas own more properties than they could ever need. They have millions in liquid assets. They have the resources and influence to make a real, meaningful impact on struggling families. But instead of taking action, of actually practicing what they preach, they continue to amass wealth while telling middle-class Americans they need to give more and sacrifice for the greater good. And it's not just Michelle Obama. This is a pattern among wealthy liberal elites. Take Bernie Sanders, the self-proclaimed socialist who owns 3 homes, including a lakefront retreat worth over $500,000. Or Elizabeth Warren, who bashes Wall Street while raking in massive book deals and speaking fees. Or Nancy Pelosi, whose net worth is well over $100 million, thanks in no small part to her husband's stock trades. Trades that, conveniently, always seem to align with major policy shifts in Congress. These are the same people who insist the wealthy should give back, while quietly stacking up their own fortunes. And yet, when a conservative businessman like Donald Trump is wealthy, the media treats it as proof of greed and corruption. But when it's the Obamas, the Pelosi's, the Sanders of the world, crickets. So let's be crystal clear about what's happening here. Michelle Obama is not struggling. She is not some voice of the working class. She is a multimillionaire living in absolute luxury while telling everyday Americans they need to do more for government programs. Her words sound nice, but they're empty because they aren't backed by action. If she truly believed that no one should take more than they need, she'd be the first to downsize her own lifestyle. But she hasn't. And let's be honest, she never will. And that should tell you everything you need to know. Because when it all comes down to it, this isn't about making life better for working Americans. It's not about fairness. It's about control. The people who preach about wealth redistribution always seem to be the ones with the most to lose. They don't actually want to share their wealth. They want to secure their influence. They want the average person to have less while they quietly accumulate more. They want a system where they decide who has too much, where they shape the narrative, where they sit comfortably at the top while telling everyone else to sacrifice. And Michelle Obama's speech at the DNC? That was nothing more than a carefully choreographed performance, designed to keep people distracted from the reality of who she really is. But her speech wasn't just significant because of what she said. It was even more revealing because of what she didn't say. She had the stage, the attention of the entire Democratic Party, and millions of voters watching. This was her moment to deliver a strong, passionate defense of Joe Biden, to remind Americans why his presidency had been a success, to rally people behind his leadership. Instead, she talked about dread, disappointment, and lost hope. That's not the message of someone standing firmly behind an administration they believe in. And it raises a question that the media refuses to ask. Was Michelle Obama quietly signaling that Biden was never meant to finish this race? For months, there had been growing speculation that the Democratic Party's biggest donors and power players had lost confidence in Biden's ability to win. His approval ratings were tanking. His public appearances were becoming harder to defend. Even his most loyal media allies were struggling to spin his presidency as anything but a failure. Yet, despite all of that, Democratic leadership stuck to the script. They shut down potential challengers. They acted as if the idea of him stepping down was absurd. Then, almost overnight, he was gone. And the very people who had spent years insisting that he was the best and only option suddenly shifted gears, acting like this was always the plan. That's why Michelle Obama's speech matters. It wasn't just about reflecting on the state of the country. It was a calculated move to reset the narrative, to prepare voters for what comes next. She didn't defend Biden's record because that wasn't the point. The point was to ease people into a post-Biden future. And here's the biggest question of all. Was Barack Obama himself orchestrating Biden's exit from behind the scenes? Think about it. Barack Obama has remained one of the most powerful figures in the Democratic Party. Even after leaving the White House, his influence never faded. His endorsement was key to Biden winning in 2020, and behind closed doors he has maintained deep connections with the party's top donors, insiders, and strategists. So was this all part of a bigger plan? Was Biden just a placeholder until the right moment came for the Democratic elite to push him aside? Because if that's the case, then Michelle Obama's speech wasn't just a critique of Biden's presidency. It was a signal that the next phase of the plan is already in motion. And over the past year, the whispers about Barack Obama's role in Biden's departure have only grown louder. Political analysts have pointed to multiple reports suggesting that Obama was one of the key figures who convinced Biden to step aside. That he, along with major Democratic donors, saw the writing on the wall. Biden wasn't going to beat Trump. If they wanted to keep the White House, they needed a new strategy. But here's where things get even more interesting. If the Democratic Party was ready to move away from Biden, why did they replace him with Kamala Harris? The first impression is that this is a peculiar action to take. Harris has been one of the vice presidents who has garnered the least amount of support in the contemporary era. On a sustained basis, her approval ratings have always been below average. Even among voters who identify as Democratic, support for her candidacy has been at best lukewarm. Why, therefore, would the party immediately coalesce behind Harris after they had already removed Biden from their position? It's possible that the answer has little to do with the election that will take place in 2024, but it has everything to do with the future of the Democratic Party. If members of the Democratic elite, including the Obamas, were involved in Biden's decision to leave the party, then their attention was not just focused on the current election. They were engaged in long-term planning. They were contemplating who would be in charge of determining the course that the party would take for many years to come. And this is precisely what makes the speech that Michelle Obama gave even more illuminating. She did not attend in order to support Biden. She wasn't even present to present a compelling argument in favor of Harris. In order to reaffirm the Obama's position as the steadying influence of the Democratic Party, she was present at the event. Take a look at the topics that she covered throughout her speech. There was no particular policy at issue here. It was not about defending the achievements that Biden had achieved. The issue was about something more fundamental: the necessity for someone to steer the nation through its dark times, as well as the importance of leadership and hope. This is not a recommendation for the administration that is currently in power. In other words, that is a deliberate and calculated distance from it. And the timing is even more suspicious than it needs to be. A few months prior to the Democratic National Convention, political insiders began circulating Michelle Obama's name as a potential presidential contender. This occurred at the same time that rumors about Biden's likely departure acquired further traction. If the situation were to get extremely bad, there were others who suggested that she could serve as an emergency replacement for Biden. On the other hand, other people believed that she was being prepared for a run in the year 2028. It should come as no surprise that Michelle Obama has openly denied having any interest in running for office. To add insult to injury, her husband did the same thing. Before the election in 2008, Barack Obama responded to inquiries about a possible bid for the presidency by describing the concept as absurd. After another 2 years, he found himself in the White House. Should we thus have the confidence to think that Michelle Obama has no interest whatsoever in holding political power? Or did this speech, this entire moment at the Democratic National Convention, go beyond just Kamala Harris? Would Michelle be able to use this opportunity to test the waters for her own career in politics? In addition, if this is the case, then Biden's departure was not merely a response to the falling poll numbers. Rather, it was a component of a much more comprehensive plan, a strategy that is intended to pave the way for a new era of Democratic leadership, with the Obamas continuing to be at the center of everything that is going on. For precisely this reason, Megyn Kelly and a number of other pundits were quick to call out Michelle Obama's statement for what it actually was. This was not only a campaign speech, rather it was a political movement. Not only that, but here is what makes this even more intriguing. It is quite unlikely that the Obamas will make a sudden return to political power if they are preparing to do so over a longer period of time. They would not make it easy to understand. They plan to carry it out in stages. The first step is to force Biden out, already completed. The second step is to provide Harris with the minimum amount of support necessary to prevent the party from being fractured. Already, that is taking place. Wait for the appropriate time to re-enter the spotlight, which is the third step involved. In the year 2024, that time might not happen. It may be the year 2028. On the other hand, there is no misunderstanding. The components are already being assembled. A question that needs to be asked today is whether or not Michelle Obama's speech was actually about party unity. Was it about something that was far more significant? If the Obamas continue to exert influence behind the scenes, then the question arises as to who is actually in charge of the Democratic Party. At the Democratic National Convention, the endorsement of Kamala Harris was not the only thing that took place. This was a moment that would forever solidify the Obamas' hold on the future of the Democratic Party. It was something much more significant. Every single speech, every single piece of messaging, and every single carefully selected picture made one thing perfectly clear. Barack and Michelle Obama continue to be the most dominant figures in the party, and they aim to continue to maintain that status. The question that needs to be asked, however, is whether or not this was truly about Kamala Harris, or whether it was about maintaining the Obamas' position at the center of American politics. Mostly due to the fact that, if we are being completely honest, the Democratic Party would not require Michelle Obama to serve as the emotional anchor of the convention if they truly believed in Kamala Harris. They wouldn't require figures from the Obama administration to keep the party together. In the event that they are having difficulty selling their candidates to the general public, they would not be required to invoke the legacy of Barack Obama. In all honesty, Barack Obama has never truly stepped away from the political arena. Despite the fact that he does not have a position of authority, his influence has remained more powerful than it has ever been. The endorsements he has received are more influential than those of any other living Democrat. His network of charitable contributors is among the most influential in the nation. He has maintained his ties with influential members of the media, significant policy groups, and grassroots organizations throughout his whole career. This effect is more apparent than it has ever been before, especially now that Biden is no longer a factor. During her speech at the Democratic National Convention, Michelle Obama did not simply express her support for Kamala Harris. Rather, she served as a reminder to the Democratic establishment that the Obamas continue to be in charge of the party. It was a moment that had been meticulously planned out with the intention of accomplishing two goals. First, to disassociate the Obamas from the problems that were caused by the administration of Vice President Joe Biden, and second, to portray them as the consistent and guiding force that will steer the Democratic Party into the future. Moreover, this is the point at which things become even more intriguing. Michelle Obama has maintained for a number of years that she has no intention of ever running for public office. The fact that she does not intend to run for president has been declared on multiple occasions. On the other hand, let us not forget that Barack Obama once made the same statement. In the years leading up to 2008, Barack Obama played down the possibility of running for president. By the time he was a junior senator, he had not yet established his political brand. He stated to those who were interviewing him that he was not considering running for president and that it was not in his intentions to do so. Then, after only 2 years had passed, he began his campaign the next year. When it comes to politics, are we really supposed to think that Michelle Obama has completely withdrawn from the campaign? The fact that she is present at the Democratic National Convention is contrary. During the convention, she was not required to give a speech. Her presence may have been relegated to the background. It would have been possible for her to quietly back Kamala Harris without drawing unwelcome attention to herself. Instead, she was the one who took the spotlight. She gave a speech that was considered to be among the most attention-grabbing of the entire event. Furthermore, by doing so, she pushed herself directly into the process of the Democratic Party moving away from Biden. And it is precisely this aspect that makes the election strategy for 2024 so fascinating. Because if Michelle Obama were to even remotely consider running for president, whether it be in 2028 or later, this is precisely how she would begin setting the framework for her campaign. She begins by distancing herself from the shortcomings of the administration of Vice President Joe Biden. Despite the fact that she admits the difficulties that the United States is facing, she does not directly criticize the Democratic Party. It is her intention to portray herself as a voice of reason, a presence that is calming and a guiding light for hope. Second, she asserts that she is free from the influence of political politics. In her remarks, she did not discuss policy. The typical Democratic talking points were not the topic of discussion. This was about feelings, about coming together as a group, and about the greater picture. There is a way for politicians to prepare for a campaign without really announcing that they would be running for office. Not only that, but she also allows speculation to do the work for her. There is no requirement for her to declare her candidacy. Now, all that is required of her is to give the fundraisers, the media, and the political strategists the opportunity to begin visualizing it. And there is no denying the fact that they are already imagining it. According to allegations that have appeared over the course of several months, prominent Democratic funders and strategists have been privately mulling over the possibility of Michelle Obama running for president. People have speculated that she might be the most formidable candidate for the party in the year 2028. Others have gone even further, predicting that Michelle Obama might be positioned as a last-minute substitute for Kamala Harris in the event that she has a difficult time in the general election. All of this, of course, is merely guesswork at this point in time, but the most important question is still, do the people of the United States truly want more of the same policies that brought us to this point? Because despite the fact that the Obamas have made numerous attempts to disassociate themselves from the political failures that have occurred over the course of the previous 4 years, their influence has never truly vanished. What policies have resulted in the alarming increase in criminal activity in major cities? The middle class is being severely impacted by the economic challenges. What are the developing political differences that are causing the country to degenerate? It was not Joe Biden who was the originator of these issues. Over the course of a decade, they have been constructing. And if the Obamas continue to be the ones who are in charge, the issue that really has to be asked is not simply about the years 2024 or 2028. The issue at hand is whether or not voters are prepared to embark on yet another chapter in the Obama era, regardless of whether or not they desire it.